Alright, in this lecture we will be talking about a few things, most importantly feminism, the impact it has upon relationships, and we will be talking about how Western civilization deals with victimhood and how it is sensitive to victimhood and how these things connect. So, today I was reading in a newspaper. It's a Saturday newspaper today. It's 27th of July in 2013. It was an article, it was a column written by Leon de Winter. He's a Dutch writer, and he wrote about the Trayvon Martin case, who was a black teenager who was shot by a neighborhood watchman who was a Latino, and there was a huge media controversy about this, where they depict the Latino as a racist murderer, and the boy was actually a burglar. They depict him as someone innocent, and Obama even said that Trayvon Martin could have been his son. And now De Winter wrote a huge article about this. He went into depth into the black community and the situation of the black community in America. And he was saying, well, Obama's propaganda machine makes from the mother of Martin a symbol of a woman who is under siege by the right-wing press. And so his propaganda machine succeeded in making this Trayvon Martin case the symbol of a right-wing war on women. And he says it also puts in racial notions such as white versus black, even though the guy who did it was a Latino, so he wasn't genuinely white. But then De Winter, he examined this media spin, and he said, well, we can't really say that there's a right-wing war against women at all. And there's also no massive deadly violence of white people against black people. He says, no, it's not true. He says, we see that there's a massive unemployment within younger sections of the black populace. He says it's almost 50%, and he says that 73% of all black children is being raised by an unmarried, lowly educated mother. And then he concludes, well, the fact that 73% of black children are born in unstable families pretty much sets them up for a life of poverty and without the father. Now, as we will be going into this, what it turns out is that the black family has been destabilized. We can ask ourselves a question. Well, people often speak about the 1986 revolution, where the working classes and the hippie students and the progressives all teamed up to challenge what they called the patriarchy, which pretty much means the establishment of big business, the church, and the Anglo-Saxon white male as the head of the family. And the society has transformed. He says, for now, it's much more normal when a black person is, for example, a famous artist, or a black person is a famous musician. So at the same time, we can see that more black people have penetrated the upper ranks of society, and yet at the same time we see that the black family has been dismantled. He says it's even worse than before. There's lots of single mothers, people make a father, a child, but then they leave the family, and this sets up the children for a neighborhood crime. And ultimately, it can have a very tragic consequence, as is in the Trayvon Martin case. It's an example of a tragic situation. So, at the same time, what I heard was that this week, the government of the Caribbean islands launched a complaint against Western governments, including the governments of the Netherlands, for slave trade. So they want to go back 100 years into history and sue them for bringing slaves to the Caribbean islands. So why does this work? Why? Because it's a common meme that people know that the Western peoples, they will take their responsibility. They will be responsible men, and they will care for the weaker ones. They will take responsibility for the victims. They will fix things. Which is because our civilization is sensitive to victimhood. Ever since we had tragedies such as the Second World War and the fate of the Jews, or for instance the Ku Klux Klan, the Western civilization is sensitive to the fate of minorities, of weaker peoples, and therefore we're susceptible to such claims, which also explains the media controversy about the Trayvon Martin case. But at the same time, it's a huge paradox, I figured, because we're so proud that minorities are having better positions in the society, but at the same time, this progressive thinking has dismantled the core of the family and has dismantled stable upbringing for children. And especially, this is what De Winter points out, the black community has been hit the hardest by this. So, it's like hand in hand. On the one hand, you have these protester women. They're wearing their garden hose trousers. People often say, with a note of ridicule, these are the mannish women, with unshaven armpits, and they're shouting and they're protesting. The male patriarch suppresses us. What we need to do is to have a quota for women to be accepted in the boards of big companies. There needs to be a quota. So it's what they call affirmative action. So you're obliged to hire women as position of manager, a certain percentage. So it's no longer about your merits, no longer about your qualities or about what you can do. It's about your gender. And this is the way that these activists have tried to breach through the patriarchy, what they call the dominance of white Western males. And these progressive feminists teamed up with other minority activists and at the same time made an alliance of progressive thinking, and we call this alliance the 1968 revolution that many writers have criticized, including the influential French writer Michel Houellebecq has criticized it in romance novels such as Elementary Particles. And what we see is a feeling of estrangement. Because the bottom line is, a politician, for example, in the Obama administration, would be very proud to be in a photo with a famous black musician or a famous black artist. And to have a photo and have that photo in the newspaper or in his weblog, because we can see, yes, this is the American dream, this is the power of diversity. But what we don't look at is that this feminism has at the same time dismantled the concept of providing for your family, and at the same time dismantled the concept of looking after your wife and your children and being a reliable husband. That this has dismantled this idea, and this has hit the bottom of society very hard. And he says, Leon de Winter, he says, in the black community, the family structures have been demolished the last 50 years. And this is also the case for the lowest regions of the white labor class. Also in the white labor class, the white family structures are falling down, and most children are now growing up with unmarried mothers, and the crime rates are very high. And it is true that the movement that demanded equal rights for black people, it became very successful, and nowadays black people belong to the top of academia and the arts and management and economic life. It also increased at the same time the breakdown of the black family. So we see a sort of monstrous alliance here between feminists and other minority activists. And at some point, a man might ask himself the question, why would we take this? Why would we still put up with this? There was a movie by some male rights activists, and they made the case, and they said, well, let's think about it. What if it took 1,000 years of history to produce the 50s that? And then they meant, the guy with the raincoat and the hat going dutifully to his work in the metro every day, is coming back at 5 o'clock in the evening, and his wife would cook potatoes for him and give him a kiss and bring his newspaper, and this is like the standard 1950 family. What if it took 1,000 years to produce and condition this kind of man? Because, face it, it was said, why would you stick to having a relationship with one woman? You could have more loose relationships at the same time. And why would you stick around to bring up your child if you could also walk away? Why would you put up with it? Why would you take responsibility for this if you're not rewarded with status? Because with all this feminism, men are at the same time pushed into the condition of the underdog, because the same feminist activists, they speak about men often in terms of creeps or of stalkers or of perverts, and they see them as cultural imperialists and as oppressors who have pushed women back into the kitchen. And that's all political framing of the debate to push themselves up. But you cannot be the underdog and at the same time be expected to provide for others. You cannot be the underdog and at the same time being expected to sustain all the others and sustain the rest. Why would you put up with it if you're not rewarded with some status? If you might as well walk away. I think that's really the larger point of the discussion about feminisms and the stability of the family. You often hear when you speak about the going out life that women have adopted princessy behavior. So you're not only supposed to be, well, very good at expressing yourself and at carrying a conversation, but you're also supposed to, be dressed fanciful and have money, have a good job with a high social position. So we can say that the demands have been increased. If you call about sexual market, that the demands have been increased for men to meet. And that by itself might not be a problem, but then if you compare, well, it has hypocritical expectations, because at the same time you're being framed as the oppressor, being a man, and being framed as the one who held the women back. And you're supposed to be sensitive and understanding. And at the same time you're also supposed to be the provider. And then there's still contradictory expectations, because if you go to the scene such as the pickup artist community, where men who feel insecure and don't know how to seduce a woman, they get training and education, and what they tell them there is that, well, if you are a man and if you want to seduce a woman, you're not supposed to bring her chocolates and bring her flowers. No, because women are nowadays economically independent. That has changed since the 1968 revolution. Women are nowadays economically independent, so you need to project raw masculine sexual identity. That's what they will fall for. For if you manifest raw masculinity, that's how you get them nowadays. So we see a contradictory expectation here, because on the one hand the man is supposed to be the aggressor, the bodybuilder brute, the caveman, the real raw, sweaty, aggressive man. And at the same time he's supposed to be sensitive and not being imperialist and not being a chauvinist. And he's supposed to be meek. He's like supposed to be the best friend and the understanding buddy. He's supposed to be sensitive. And he's supposed to express his feelings and things like that. And so we have created our memes with TV shows such as Sex and the Cities that flood people's mind with contradictory ideas about relationships. It goes back to the teenage Hollywood romance novel comedy, where the prettiest girl always gets the prettiest guy, the football coach, the sports star, and at the same time there's the ugly boy who is mocked by everyone, but at the end of the day he pulls off a heroic feat where he still manages to get the prom queen and impress everyone. And that's supposed to be the American dream at the same time. No one gets left behind, which is obviously contradictory to the actual sex market, where it's often very harsh, with very harsh rejections. I mean, even in internet dating, you can have a conversation for someone with an hour and then show a photo, but if they don't consider the photo attractive, they might just block you without any explanation or without even a sense of guilt or feeling sorry, but else I'm not attracted to you, we're just wasting each other's time here. If you even get such an explanation. So this idea that no one gets left behind, that we feel in the media, in the teenage romance comedies, in the Sweet 16 parties, where they tell you, well, you know what? There's always the perfect other half of the orange. There's someone for everyone. That's what they tell you, and at the same time, this is completely alien to what people really feel and experience. So it creates clashing expectations within the self, leading to incoherent feelings, leading to frustration, and that's where we get the internet porn industry. People have to drown their frustrations. And also, shapes a pretty unnatural image of sex into people's minds, and which gives rise to even further artificial expectations. So we see slowly by slowly the morality of society is crumbling down, or at least giving a new shape. But the question is this shape still reliable? I mean, if it's really true that society, ever since the hunter-gatherer society, ever since the medieval age and then the Industrial Revolution, it conditioned men over thousands of years to be responsible and to help raise a family. If men are not doing this by nature, and if we created all these cultural conditions to stimulate males into helping women raise families, and suddenly we have this 1968 revolution, and poof, it's all out of the window. And people in their progressive utopianism have not been able to foresee that, or have not wanted to see that.
Yeah.
That's what we're really getting at. And I was speaking about all of this with a very beautiful woman. I think she's about 20 years old, very thin, blonde, very pretty, and she's also intelligent. And she said, but why? It's not just that the child is the wish of a woman. No, it's the male. The male wants to have a child, and therefore he loves to raise a family. And I'm telling her, well, that's what today's society makes us males think, and it has taken us thousands of years to make us believe this. But is it really true? Because, well, it's not necessary to stay with one woman. Why would you work the whole day and then give a part of your salary away to your family? Why would you do that? Only if you're rewarded with a particular status. But if the males are only good to be as providers, which gets back to the princessy behavior of the sweet 16 party and the limousine and the pink ballroom dresses, and that many girls nowadays, adolescents, expect this stuff as taken for granted, why would you put up with all that? Why would you not, for the same time, I don't know, work for yourself, work for half an hour, and then take the money and go to Ukraine, or go to Thailand, or go to Vietnam, and live there, where you suddenly have this status? Because a normal Western guy, such as a car mechanic, or someone who is an assistant in a bakery, or an assistant in a warehouse, if he cannot keep up with his status anymore, where he has to provide for all of these things, then why would he even bother to? Why wouldn't he just save money for himself and go to somewhere else where it's easier for him to have a high status and seduce a woman? And if this is true, because I've seen this happening, even, and not just with car mechanics in my vicinity, but also with very influential officials in the European Parliament, have said to me, I mean, why would I? I can just go to Ukraine, live there as God in France, and do as I want. And okay, perhaps I will not have a fleeting, he says, I won't have a stable relationship that fills me fully, he says, but it will be better than having to date a woman who has been through 1,000 broken relationships before, with dozens of bad boyfriends who treated her badly, with a woman who's probably been through open relationships already, having to put up with all of her emotional complex, having to put with all of the superficial relations she had, because all of this is a burden on her psychology. All of this will have imprinted upon her expectations from the relationships. So why would I put up with that? I'm not going to put up with it, they tell me. So I take my money, and you know what? I don't care if I can live this lifestyle until I am 60 years old. I keep myself in good shape, but I am satisfied with not having a stable, committed relationship. Because the way I see it, I can only lose out in the longer run. That's what I get to hear from many people. And this could point at the falling down of the Western civilization. Have I covered everything that I wanted to cover? Yeah, exactly. Because this same beautiful blonde woman that I talked to, she also said, you know, men are supposed to work for it. And I do mean, what do you mean? What do you mean men are supposed to work for it? The men are supposed to ask us out and buy drinks for us in the disco when we dance with them.
That's just very true. Yeah, I mean, I agree with pretty much everything you said. I mean, that's the big thing, really, is that we don't have. We're now in this kind of this like utopian idea we have like implanted in our heads of egalitarianism, equality. You know, in practice, it doesn't come into flourishing. You know, it doesn't actually. It's not true. It's not true. Practically, it's not right. You know, in a day as a man, you know, you are going to be valued by society for what you do, because you're not going to be valued for having children. You know, that's women. Women will be valued for having children. Society will perceive them with higher value because they are able to have children. We are reproductively useless in that sense. So the one thing that we can do to distinguish ourselves as being uniquely male is by how we act and how we do things, and how we do things which you know, to a higher standard, which, you know, women or children cannot do or struggle with. That's how we have a unique male identity. And as I think many in the West are really devoided from this. That's why they're very confused. That's why they're very confused. I mean, if you look at the pickup artist community now, which you were talking about, it came about probably about 10 years ago. Even though you had like some small little like pickup movements like way before in the past, like I'm talking about 70, 80 years ago, but they were very small. But the pickup artist movement with Neil Strauss and Mystery Methods, it came about 10 years ago. However, like over time, there's been different debates and different like sort of opposing schools of pickup artist theory, and it ultimately came to the decision that direct game wins. And the difference between indirect and direct game is the whole idea that indirect game is where you will you almost become very passive, you become very receptive when it comes to women, in the sense that you obviously you're going to approach them, but you don't have your intentions so clear when you're talking to them. You kind of demonstrate that you have higher value, and all this kind of ridiculous stuff that comes along with apparently indirect games, such as like painting your nails red. That's been talked about in these pickup artist books, wearing silly hats, like dressing, peacocking, all this kind of stuff. But ultimately, people realised, like, look, direct game works, because these pickup artists who, like through years went on with indirect game, they said to themselves, they became distraught because they were emulating like so-called alpha characteristics, and they weren't actually like living it. It was all about kind of imitating. That's what it was. It wasn't actually about becoming what you want to call an alpha male. It was about imitating it. And so direct game in the end won, and that goes into what they're talking about, inner game, etc., about developing confidence, about actually genuinely living a high value lifestyle for yourself, not just because you want to get laid.
Okay.
There's an interesting blog somewhere around here, and I'm going to try and find the name for it. It's a very, 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 very clever person who was writing about the false sexual marketplace, because you were talking about the sexual marketplace, and basically the reference was that we created a kind of false sexual marketplace, because in the past, like before the 60s, it's only in the very, very recent times, in the last like 4 decades, where we've had the welfare state, where we've had big business to support women. So men being rendered absolute disposable, and also this whole idea, women can do any job that a man could do, which basically, when we know that a man is only going to be valued for his unique male identity and what he does, that means that men are basically obsolete, because look, a woman can do your job. A woman can do your job better than you. This is what President Obama says. That's basically saying to men, hey guys, look, you're obsolete. You're not needed for anything anymore. If we really want to, we can have the welfare state to back us up. We can have a big business to back us up, and in a way, society is going to support us for that.
Yeah, exactly, and it doesn't make sense that on the one hand, these beautiful princessy chicks, they're saying, the men are supposed to work for us. They are supposed to show us by gifts and by other behavior that they can take care of us, that they can sustain and support us. The man is supposed to do the work, ask us out, book the dinner table, etc. And at the same time, there's these activists screaming, the imperialist, chauvinist, patriarch males have suppressed us and denied us economic opportunities. They have denied us economic equality. So now we need to have a set quota for women, so that businesses are obliged to hire set amounts of women in the management directorate boards. How does it even comply?
Again, I mean, these, when it comes down to a lot of feminists, especially the second wave, especially the third wave types, let alone the second wave feminists that came around in the 60s, but especially the third wave types, and especially with a lot of these other progressives, there's so many contradictions. There's a lot of contradictions. I mean, already I saw this myself. Like, I used to go to socialist worker parties meetings when I was younger. I was very interested in that kind of movement, and I was looking in, and I'll attend these meetings and I'll be speaking to them, and I found like so many contradictions along with them. For example, like the SWP and United Against Fascism in the UK, they would be mainly consisted of very like middle class students who are socialists, who are liberals, who are very progressive, who talk about, they write theses on how they dislike the patriarchy and how they got to abolish whiteness and all these other kind of they're basically massive supporters of these critic theories that came around in the 1960s. But there's the massive contradictions, because the United Against Fascists and the Socialist Worker Party would align themselves with the most conservative groups in UK society, which would be will be the Islamic organisations. They are very conservative. Well, by the standards of the social workers parties, their members who were against male-headed families, etc., and calling that patriarchal. However, they were supporting and completely aligned with the Islamic groups, which obviously have a very, very strong gender traditional norms and values. They're very conservative in that sense. And I found that a massive contradiction.
It is, Alex, and it goes back to what I said before. People knows that the Western society, it might go back all the way to Christianity with its message of the meek and the downtrodden will inherit the earth, and rich men won't go to heaven, and it's the poor people, they are going through an ordeal by God, but ultimately God will reward them in heaven. And all the wise and learned men, their wisdom is idiocy, is foolishness in the mind of God. So the idea that the weak and the downtrodden are on the right track of history, whereas the bourgeois and the owners and the aristocracy, they are, the bad guys. They are the children of darkness. So we go back to the weak being glorified, being identified with, which goes back to Obama. He identifies with Trevor Martin, for instance. It goes back to socialism, saying that the labor class is on the right path of history, and the bourgeois, while eventually capitalism will overthrow the bourgeois, and the socialists will win. So, the underdog wins out in the end, whether by the love of God or whether by the history itself, as we see in communism, the idea ultimately that the weak are on the right track of history. And this we see in feminism. They frame the woman as a position of the weaker one, of the victim, even though the woman will always have the sexual power to control, and who has the sexual power of control, because it's always the woman who gives green light or not, whether the date can end up in sex or not. So the woman often has the sexual control, and who has the sexual control will decide what will be passed on to the future and what will not be passed on to the future. So despite all that, feminism frames the women as being in the position of the victim, and if you criticize the victim, if you criticize feminism, you must be bigoted, you must be someone who bullies others. And that's, as Leon de Winter points out, the Obama press campaign made very good use of this power of framing a debate in terms of bullies versus victims. And now, to top it all off, what you said about, labor class socialists aligning themselves with Islam, who have rather conservative views on gender and relationships, about homosexuality, about women, about virgin girls and menstruation and things like that. It's a contradiction. Let me point out an example. I was once dating a French woman, and I was at her apartment, and we went out for dinner, and during this dinner she told me, she said, you know what? Let's take a look at the white men. Their mothers cook for them, their mothers clean for them, and when they hang out with their girlfriends, they just want to sleep with them at night and have sex with them, but they expect their girlfriends to be like their mothers for them. And if I compare to African men or Oriental men or Asian men, then I see that these men are much more self-supportive, and they're not so needy, and not so dependent on the white mother figure. And this woman who told me this herself, she was from black mixed with Arab descent. And she was telling me this very, very passionately, and I was thinking, but is this really true? I mean, of course, there's many white males who live at home and their mother does a lot of things for them, such as washing their clothes and cleaning their bed sheets and things like that. Sure, I won't deny it, but in genuine, white men and white people in general, they're often very well dressed when they go to work, for instance. Their houses are always tidy and cleaned up, and I can say that they're also rather polite. Not always, but often. In going out and acting to others. And I'm not saying that non-white people and non-Western peoples is not the case, but since her point was about women's freedom, well, I'm definitely not sure how much freedom women have in the Middle East. Many women cannot drive car in Saudi Arabia, and under Sharia law, the woman is always supposed to be accompanied by a male family relative, or she's not supposed to be out on the street, because if a man will make a sexual assault on the woman, she had it coming because she was not being escorted by a male family relative. She was whoring, essentially. Well, that is how the Sharia law frames the woman. And in Japan, when they marry, the woman is supposed to go into the house, give up her public ambitions, and provide for the man, especially in the middle and lower class segments of the society. And if I add up all of these things together, I mean, is it really true that, I don't know, in South American countries or whatever, that men are always, well, impregnating the woman and then sticking around to really care for the woman and really care for the child? Is it so common in non-Western cultures that men stick around to father the child? I'm really not sure about this. This is what I thought when I heard her say that. I was thinking this is a cultural construction that we as Western society have given care to develop this. That it's normal for a man to want a child with a woman and to develop it with a woman and to provide for their family and not just to run away and take tail and go off. That's a cultural construction. Now, and as other things you said, such as that men are supposed to, be a bit the odd one out to attract attention and use this to build status and paint their nails red. I think this is kind of effeminate behavior. Some will call it emasculate behavior, but I would say effeminate behavior. And you see this in clothing. I mean, I saw men wearing their underwear in such a way that it sticks out, above their bottom, above their lower back. I mean, see, this is not how men were supposed to dress, 50 years ago. This is like, the new gangster style or something. And they're even wearing pink underwear nowadays for men. And other things like that, such as men are supposed to shave their chests and use facial creams and other things. So we can see that the man is more a more effeminate identity is expected of the male, in a sense, to make himself, in the sexual market. He is assuming a more effeminate identity, which, one could say, is this what they ultimately want, to make the male obsolete, as you said, to rob him of his most primal instincts? Is the larger scheme behind this?
The Western man has been domesticated. That's it. The Western man has been completely domesticated, and it comes to a point now where they do not know how to be a man as such. They do not know how to be a man because they've been given so many conflicting messages throughout the time. And the bottom line is, is that a woman, she's attracted to a man. She's attracted to a real man. She's not going to be attracted. I mean, all these these different techniques and these ideas where people are saying, saying, look, I mean, what can I do to get this, beautiful woman? Do I have to have confidence? Is it humor? Is it, chocolate poetry by ignoring them? Blah blah blah. All these techniques. But in the day, the guy who gets the men who get the most women, the 20% who get the rest of the 80% are the ones who are literally, they're like men. They're the ones who they aren't receptive. They aren't passive. They don't care about that. They don't care about the outcome. They're the ones who they're the ones who just go for it. They're the ones who just completely go for it. They're the ones who don't, because I mean, there's this kind of mentality which kind of a lot of men have now, which is we have to kind of win her. Whereas the guys who have the mentality like, no, she has to win me. They're the ones who do well in the long run. This massacre is such a problem we have now. The fact that we need to have internet forums and special training camps for guys to know how to get a wife or to get a girlfriend or to be attractive. This is what a modern construct is. This is the result and backlash of all this kind of alterations and this trying to change the dynamics between men and women.
Yeah. No, I think we've really nailed it with this, Alex. So what I think is that we can conclude the lecture with this statement. And I would say that anyone who enjoys this lecture, found it useful, found it inspiring, can get in touch with us, and hopefully we can expand this discussion to include more people and to share more thoughts. And, well, what's at stake here is the very foundation of Western civilization. And if that's precious to you, do not hesitate to get in touch. Right. Thank you, Alex.
That's it. Yeah, thanks, Sid.